Hello and welcome to another episode of Fitness Tips with Dan Guest. How you doing, Dan?
I'm all right, thank you very much.
So in our first video, which if you missed it, it's linked down below, we talked about the off-season and what the off-season is and why it's so important. And we're back with another load of interesting topics which definitely apply to winter riding, and Christmas is around the corner, hence the mince pies on the plate in front of us. Very tempting. So we got quite a few questions on that last video which we're going to tackle as well. But first, Dan, I'm going to put you on the spot because you talked about the Rapha Festive 500 in that last video, which caused a bit of reaction. Some people agreed with your viewpoint and some people disagreed and said it's the highlight of the year. So with the Festive 500 starting in just a matter of a few days, what advice can you give to somebody who is determined to do it, rain or shine?
The start of Festive 500 ambush, Dave, I like that. Okay, well, we've done some maths on this, haven't we?
We have, yes.
And I mean, if you take the Festive 100 over the full period that you're allowed to do it, that's what, 62 Ks a day-ish, we said it works out at 40 miles a day. I mean, that's not excessive. Even for someone who's not done a great deal of sort of beat-up training before that, that's not excessive. And I think, you know, if you say 40 miles a day, nice and steady, you know, between 2 and 2 3/4 hours, just sort of ticking along, maybe pick a route that's a flat route.
That's got it, yeah.
So you can get them ticked off quickly. I think that's totally doable without necessarily creating a massive amount of training stress and overload. So I will back off a little bit on what I said the last time. The problem is, I think, with the Festive 100 is that it's fine to say it's 40 miles a day for 8 days, but you add in then days that you're with your family or days that you can't ride because of the weather or any other commitments. And then more often than not, you'll find that it ends up being a couple of 100-mile rides, which, you know, is fine if you've got the condition for it. But as we said in the last video, it's cold, it's wet, it's dark. It's training stress from those factors as well as just the miles as well. I mean, if you've got the condition, as we've said, then it's no problem. And if you enjoy it, I mean, fundamentally, what are we cyclists for? Because we enjoy being on our bikes. If you enjoy being on your bike, get out on your bike and do it. It's fine.
I guess that's the best thing about the Festive 500. It's a goal, a motivation for people to ride at this time of year when the temptation to sit on the sofa and watch TV is pretty compelling.
I mean, as a coach, my biggest bugbear is recovery. People don't give themselves time to recover. And I think we'll probably get to a bit of this later on in the video. And if you just relentlessly push on through the Christmas period with a level of training stress that potentially you're not used to, with the level of dietary stress that you're potentially not used to, and booze as well, has a big impact on your body's ability to cope with training stress, then, you know, there's a lot of other confounding factors at play which you just need to take into account when you put yourself through this. Yeah. But, you know, as it stands, you know, 40 miles a day for 8 days isn't too bad.
Okay, yeah.
So I will renege on that a little bit.
So Dan's fine when you're doing it, just be sensible, I guess, is the main
Precisely
thing.
that.
Allow time for recovery.
Yeah.
I'm sure there'll be people watching this doing it one day, if you live in somewhere sunny. But here in the UK, the weather is a factor, so be sensible. Choose a flat route. You know, go by the weather forecast if you can. Yeah. To maybe increase the distance on a day when it can be nicer, sunny. Yeah, yeah. And a short day when it's raining.
Yeah, and if it's icy, maybe think about doing it on a turbo. And
if you don't succeed, it's not the end of the world.
Correct.
And how many mince pies is it okay to eat during the Festive 500 or a typical ride? Since we've got a few, there's only 5. One's gone missing already.
Yeah, and we're not responsible for that. How many mince pies is it okay to eat? Oh, that's a on-the-spot question as well. To be honest, actually, I think the best Christmas food for riding would be Christmas cake. Okay. Because it's really calorie dense, easy to wrap up and put it in your pocket, and you can eat it while you're out on your bike. I mean, how many calories in a mince pie do we say? 200?
220 of these.
All right, so if we did a really hard turbo session, then you should burn four mince pies off in an hour, but I don't suggest that's the right thing to do. I actually, on a serious coaching point, and especially as you get older, because we talked about this in the off camera, you can't outride a bad diet. It gets harder to outride a bad diet as you get older.
And a diet at this time of year can be terrible, well, personally speaking.
It can be, yeah. Yeah, so if you don't need mince pies, don't eat mince pies. Okay. I mean, it's Christmas, isn't it? If you want to have a mince pie and just go out and ride your bike. I mean, we talked about this in the last video as well. Yeah. Don't worry about it too much this time of year. Just don't put on 10 kilos.
Don't go crazy.
Yeah.
And you can focus on weight loss and diet properly in the new year. Okay, we're all out of the way. Let's move on to some more other topics. So the Festive 500 is all about riding outside, but I know you can do it indoors. And we had a question in the last video about indoor versus outdoor. Some people love riding outdoors regardless of whether can't face indoor training. So what's your advice for people who are determined to ride outside this time of year?
I mean, I think that's, to say determined to ride outside, I think if you can ride outside, you should ride outside.
Okay.
I mean, the turbo's not much fun.
No.
Even with Zwift, even with, you know, the sort of gaming aspect of it, it's not a whole heap of fun. So try and get out if you can. It's fresh air. It's, you know, it's good for you. What can we do in terms of improving safety for winter riding? Bike safety. I mean, we're going to need to go to the kitchen and get a bigger tin opener for this can of worms, I reckon, aren't we? I'm going to talk about this from my own personal point of view, and then people can take or leave that advice as they see fit, and hopefully you'll chip in with some things that you think as well. And the primary thing for me, for any riding, be it winter riding or summer riding, is making your own luck.
Okay.
Okay, and okay, what do I mean by making your own luck? I would say, in terms of road selection, time of day you ride, what weather you choose to ride in, what you choose to wear, the subject of high-vis clothing. I mean, I don't wear high-vis clothing because I normally wear team kit or club kit. Should people wear high-vis clothing? They shouldn't have to. Drivers should be paying attention, you know, but unfortunately there are so many distractions in modern cars and with phones and stuff that I think people aren't paying as much attention as they used to. It's a kind of serious point, but my mitigation for that is lights. I have lights on my bike and pretty much run with a rear light all year round. Yeah. I think that you can see a rear light further away than necessarily high-vis clothing. And to be honest, the high-vis stuff, I've never found clothing that suits the way I want to ride. They've always been too hot, too baggy, or they don't fit right. I'm sure there'll be a zillion points of view on this, and whether we should be wrapping up like Christmas trees or not, entirely up to you. When you drive your car, and most people who watch your videos, I'm sure are drivers as well, see what you see on the road and see what you think is visible. And I think when I drive, I think lights are visible. I think I see lights before I see any bright clothing that people wear, especially if it's good backlight. I also think things that move are quite good. So if you wear like luminous overshoes, they're quite prominent, aren't they? Because they sort of
going up and down.
They're a weird motion that is not natural. And personally, I've never bought a helmet that's not white because I think white is really highly visible. And I ride motorbikes as well, and I've always had white helmets for that too. You know, I think that road safety is your responsibility as a cyclist, and that's what I mean by making your own luck with that. Talking about clothing, when you go out in the winter, you've done your video on clothing about staying warm and dry, and I mean that's the most important thing. If you are warm, dry and comfortable, I think you're going to make a better decision about any situation you might find yourself in. If you're freezing cold and shaking and you've got no dexterity in your hands and your feet are like blocks of ice, then you're never going to make solid, sound decisions. And what gets even worse in that situation is if you have a mechanical problem, or you're with a group ride and someone has a puncture and you're cold already, and then you get even colder, and that's not ideal. And then that sort of brings me around to the final point I was going to make, and your bike maintenance. Winter's really hard, not only on you and your body, but also on your bike. So it's really, really worth taking the extra time to just look after your bike. I mean, at the end of the day, you might, even in the winter, you still might plummet downhill on this thing at 40 miles an hour. If the road conditions are okay, then you need to know it's going to look after you. So you've got to look after it first. And I think that pre-ride and post-ride checks, it might sound boring, take time, but really important. I mean, if I come back from a bike ride and the bike's filthy, I will wash it, stick it in the work stand, stick a bit of oil on it, but just check it over, check the tyres over. There are loads of little bits of flint this time of year that can embed in your tyre, and they'll just work their way in. over the course of a bike ride. But actually, if you've picked it up and it's not punctured your tyre, you can dig it out when you get home. And if there's a little tear in the tyre, it's actually really quite easy to just fix it with super glue. That's quite a good quick fix. But what it means is that next time you go out, that's not working its way further and further in, and so you puncture. And it all ties into standing at the side of the road, getting cold and wet and miserable, trying to fix your bike with ice cold fingers. I'm sure everyone's done that. Try not to do that. So there's all sorts of little tips and tricks you can do, I think, pre and post ride, just to maintain your bike and ensure that when you go out, it's as fit for purpose as possible, and so are you with what you're wearing.
I guess that's the big challenge with winter riding. Is a lot more preparation, a lot more faff involved compared to riding in summer, when you've got a jersey, bib shorts, and the bike's always clean. You make sure the bike's in good order, pre and post bike ride. You've got to make sure you select the right clothing for your conditions, and you're well fueled yourself and you're not tired. So there's a lot of things you need, quite a checklist of things to go through and make sure you can go out. So if you are determined to ride outside this time of year, you have to be organised, I guess. And
very much so. Often the biggest hurdle to a bike ride is just getting dressed.
Oh yeah, it can take me ages sometimes.
Well, if you're umming and ahhing about going out on your bike and you're looking at the weather going, oh, maybe not. Yeah. Actually, if you just put your kit on and go, generally it's all right. Yeah. But yeah, putting your kit on and going is that hurdle. But you're right, lay your kit out. So you're not like, I run from one end of the house to the other trying to find my top, my gloves, stuff I've just like heart rate monitor. Who knows what that is? Actually, only my wife knows what my heart rate monitor is. It's just hidden in the bathroom somewhere, I have no idea. But the faff factor is off the scale in the winter. Yeah. And if you want to go out on the road, and I think that's, get out on the road, it's important, but just make sure you don't put any little extra hurdles in the way that don't need to be.
I always find my time of ride at the time of year is, I have very few opportunities to ride around work and have a commitment. So you might have an hour or two here, and you want to maximise that hour or two on a bike and not spend half of it finding your heart rate monitor or your overshoes. And I spend like half time going outside, too cold, too warm, go back inside. So I guess experience is a big factor here as well, isn't it? Which gets better with time, obviously, but being as organised as possible and trying to make sure you get everything ready the night before, perhaps, for a ride, so you get dressed, get out there. And that's where indoor training is so appealing, because you get on the bike and you go. There's none of that faff, is there?
Yeah, you can be done in seconds, But not everyone wants to do that, and I totally get that.
Okay, yeah. So making your own luck is the takeaway then. Just be organised, be prepared. If you are training indoors, what sort of session can you advise for this time of year? What's the best sort of, is it a short, intense, or long, sweet spot, steady sort of session? What's the best approach this time of year?
For this time of year, for a road rider, I would say you're still in the period of time, as we discussed with the off-season, where you kind of don't need to be putting yourself through that mental mill quite so much. As a cross rider, this is the savage time of year for me. And that's one of the reasons I race cross, is because I do hard sessions and hard racing when the weather's appropriate using the turbo. But I mean, long, steady miles on the turbo are deathly boring, aren't they? We kind of discussed this last time. It's Netflix time. And you bung or watching cyclocross or cycling on the telly, whatever, and you bung something on and do something steady. There are various schools of thought about whether you should be doing that middle ground tempo and sweet spot work. Personally, I think it's really good. It works for me, and I think it works for a lot of other people as well. Other schools of thought talk about polarized training. So you do hard sessions, really hard sessions, and really easy sessions. I just don't think that mentally it's sustainable throughout the year. And I think that and we discussed this, just need to take that break and just remember why you ride your bike and enjoy riding your bike. If the weather's good, get out. If it's not good, then tick over on the turbo. But you don't necessarily need to go. It doesn't meet you on the rivet on the turbo.
Okay,
yeah. But there are some good packages of winter-based training on Zwift and Trainer Road and things like that. But a lot of those you'll find that it's quite extended periods at Zone 2. Zone 2 up to the bottom end of tempo, and some cadence work and bits and bobs like that. But whatever way you cut it, it's going to be boring time on the turbo. And actually pretty uncomfortable as well, because you sit at Zone 2 and the turbo tends to sort of make things hurt. Because you don't move around as much as you would on the road, and when you're actually doing intervals on the turbo and there's a bit more effort, it kind of makes you shuffle about a little bit, and you don't quite so many sort of pressure points. But yeah, it's group rides on Zwift are quite good actually.
Okay.
Some of them can be too hard, and we spoke about racing on Zwift last time. If you do get to a group ride and it's a really hard group ride, that's fine, but just remember that there's a bit of recovery that's needed after that.
Yeah.
And it's the recovery that's important.
Mm.
You know, if you just keep hammering on at the same level, then, and you don't give yourself time to recover, then you're either going to make yourself ill or injure yourself, or you're just never going to improve.
Yeah.
And it might not be that people want to improve. They can just keep doing what they're doing, but you just need to take time to recover, whether it's in the week or a week at this time of year, whatever.
If you have got like an hour or two spare on indoor training, are you better doing a structured session where you're riding in control, like zone 2, as you mentioned, or doing a group ride or even a race? Or does it depend on your goals? Like if you are trying to train, or if you're just riding for enjoyment and any exercise is better than no exercise?
It absolutely depends on your goals.
Okay.
I mean, I think we should have caveated the whole of our discussions with whatever is dependent on your goals. If your goal is to ride further and ride faster, then structured sessions are key. If your goal is just to do some general exercise, then who cares what you do? As long as you're riding your bike, it's good. If your goal is to not be bored on the turbo, get out on the road. It's very goal specific, very goal specific.
I guess the purpose of the video is hopefully you'll take something away from this video, like a few tips here and there, rather than, because it's difficult to give advice to everybody, because everybody's goals and the reason they ride a bike is so different, isn't it? Whether you're a leisure cyclist or commuting, or you are road racing or cross racing. So hopefully there's something here for everybody in amongst it all. But a lot of it does, a lot of it's sort of transferable, isn't it? And there's some good basic sort of fundamental lesson that everybody can learn, regardless what level you're at.
Yeah, I think so. I think, you just need to enjoy riding your bike. And for me personally, the reason I race cross is because it's convenient for high intensity training at this time of year, so that when the weather's nice in the summer, I can do what I primarily do this for, and that's to enjoy riding my bike.
Yeah.
I mean, the fitness I get from training on the turbo now at this time of year means that come the summer, arguably I can do whatever I want.
Okay.
And even though I personally don't get a lot of base miles in over this period, actually the intensity of stuff that I put in over this period means that come my off season or just post my off season, I can put in, like I did a ride to Melton Mowbray to get a pork pie, and that was a 250 mile round trip. And that's the sort of thing that shouldn't faze you.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So I train because I enjoy racing. If I'd give up riding my bike or racing, I'd give up racing because I like riding my bike.
Okay, yeah.
But you can use a lot of training time this time of year if you want to make sure that your summer is as comfortable as possible. And why not want to ride a bit further or a bit faster or whatever you want?
I could definitely relate to that. That's the only reason I ride a bike during the winter, so I can be reasonably fit in the summer to do whatever adventures you might have planned, whether a bike packing trip or a long ride or a race or sportive. So I guess it's finding whatever motivates you. I think hopefully a lot of people at home can relate to that as well. Like summer fitness, what it's all about, especially here in the UK. Make the most of those few months you got, do some good rides, events, and do as much training as you can. I mean, I call it training, but
winter miles, summer
winter miles, yeah. So if you're training indoors or outdoors at a time of year, how should you track your riding and training? Should you buy an expensive power meter, a heart rate monitor, or just ride on feel? What's the best approach?
We're going to go back to knowing what you want it for, or know what you want to achieve from your riding.
Because power meters are a lot more affordable these days, and lots of people probably using indoor trainers are more familiar with power, a lot more understanding generally of power. And a lot of people might think you have to buy a power meter to get any sort of real training benefit.
Definitely not.
Okay.
Definitely not. I mean, if you have a power meter on your bike, it's just, for me, cycling is about simplicity, right? A bike's a bike. You just get on a pedal thing and you enjoy what you do. You start to add more and more electronic accoutrements to that, and it becomes power meter's not working, my Garmin's not working, the lights aren't charged up. You're adding more and more hurdles, as what we talked about with winter riding and kit. So a power meter, they're amazing if you want to train to get faster, if you want to train to race. It is the best solution that we've got at the moment. And far from that era of when you could buy an SRM crankset for £3,500, we're down to a few £100 for a relatively accurate power meter. So they're not as expensive as they used to be, so they're more accessible. And I do agree that a lot more people are using smart trainers, so they're seeing the power numbers on the screen, so they have more of an appreciation of the power that they're pushing out. Personally, again, because we can't say for everybody, so I'm going to say what I do. I train on the turbo in the winter, and I use the power meter on the turbo. I have got bikes with power meters on, but when I ride on the road in the winter, I ride without a power meter.
Okay, so it's just using power indoors.
Indoors.
And outside you're not using power at all.
It's great if you want to train on the road. You need a power meter to train on the road if you want to race.
Yeah.
If you don't want to race, and that's not your primary goal, and you just want to ride a bit further and a bit faster in a long Audax or a long ride or a club ride, then arguably you can just use a heart rate monitor. It's a kind of 85-90% solution. There are nuances to heart rate training and power training which make a difference. I mean, the power meter is instant. You're going to get an instant readout. Your heart rate is always going to lag behind an effort. So if you're trying to do Tabata efforts or high intensity interval training where you're doing 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off, then a power meter is critical. A heart rate monitor is just never going to cut it, because by the time you finish that initial 30-second sprint, your heart rate's just about recovering and responding. But actually, you can do a pretty good amount of training by doing long, fairly hard intervals, sort of threshold, sweet spot level intervals, and accumulating a lot of time in that zone. And that sort of zone, if you're doing 10, 15, 20-minute intervals, well, it doesn't matter that your heart rate's going to take 30 seconds to come up to the right point, because it's going to be there or thereabouts throughout the interval. Heart rate is dependent on lots of things, though. How much coffee you drink, whether you're hydrated or not, how hot you are, and that's particularly relevant on the turbo. And you will get something called cardiac drift. So, for example, if you're at 150 beats a minute at 200 watts at the start of your exercise, and you're looking at your heart rate, and you keep it at 150 beats a minute, your power will fall and your heart rate will stay the same. Your body is capable of doing 200 watts. But if you're just tracking heart rate, because you're getting hotter and more tired, then your power is dropping as you keep that heart rate the same. If you train with power, you sit at 200 watts and your heart rate will gradually climb over time. Not a great deal, so there's not a huge amount of difference, but there's enough difference that if you really want to make the most of your training, absolutely, like the final few percent, then the power meter is the thing to have. So there's sort of confounding factors with heart rate. We talked about caffeine and stuff like that and how tired you are, but you can do a good job on the road with heart rate.
Okay, yeah.
And you'll know if you want a power meter. And there's no point in training with a power meter if you're not prepared to test regularly. Testing's horrible.
Yeah,
you and I
FTP
both
test.
know that. Yeah. So there's
Ramp
loads of
test.
different FTP tests. Zwift and Trainer Road both got a ramp test on them.
Yeah.
And if you train with either of those devices, then it's worth doing a ramp test.
Yeah.
If you're not as experienced, if you're more experienced, do the 2 8-minute or the 20-minute test. But they will give you an FTP figure, and actually the Zwift and Trainer Road zones will just be spat out of that FTP figure, and it will work it all out for you. If you're keen to learn more about it yourself, there's a couple of books that I brought down. That's quite an easy read, that one.
I'll put links to these down below if you want to check them out on Amazon. So the Power Meter Handbook. I guess, they are tools. I need to know how to use that tool.
Yeah, very much so.
It's easy to get a power meter, you get a number, and think, oh, that number's going up and down. But you need to know how to use that data properly, don't you?
The power reading means nothing out of context.
Okay.
And you need to put it in context for yourself with your own FTP test, and that's only relevant to you. And it's only relevant to you on that device in the setup that you've got it. And I always say to people, test and train, or test as you want to train. Yeah. If you test and train on different devices, you might need different FTPs. I mean, my FTP on the road with the crankset I've got might be different to my FTP on the turbo trainer.
Okay, yeah, different.
Not much. I mean, they are getting better. Power meters are getting better and they're more accurate. So that's an easy palatable one to get into it if you're interested in learning about it. And then that's the super geeky one. That's the Power Meter Training Bible, basically. I think this is version 2, and I think there is a more updated version. But I keep this one because it's full of.
I see.
It's full of my shopping list. Actually, it's full of my it's full of my notes. Yeah,
so I see that being well used as well. Lots of training and racing with a power meter. I'll link to that down below as well. So that's a pretty hefty book. So you go buy a power meter and buy a book. So
it's quite technical, that one.
Yeah.
I would, if you're just getting into it, I'd go for that one first, and then that will give you a broad understanding, which that one can then refine.
Okay. Yeah. Let us know down below if you want a more in-depth video on training with power with Dan. We can do that in the future because clearly a lot to get into. I mean, look at that book. That's a topic in itself, really.
Yeah.
So a power meter, if you're really committed to getting like that last percentage point of performance, heart rate not to be underestimated. How about riding with feel, not using any data at all, and just ride with feel and perceived effort? Can you use that?
Yeah, it's still got its place.
Okay, yeah.
It's still got its place. If you're doing intervals or efforts where you can barely talk, but you can sustain and barely talk, well, that's a good training zone. That's a sort of rate of perceived effort of of a physiological stage in your training that in the intensity that is useful for your training, but it's not going to exhaust you. Okay. It's kind of like tempo sweet spot. But I still do all my racing on feel.
Really?
Yeah, I don't race. I haven't raced cross or time trial or road with a power meter I've never done it.
Is that because you know your body really well, or is it trying to remove a distraction when you're racing? Two
elements. Yeah, it's a For me, it's a distraction. I know loads of people who can't race without a power meter, and sometimes it can be a help, and sometimes it can be a hindrance. Sometimes you can say, I should be producing this many watts for this time trial, and I can't do that. So something's wrong, and then so much cycling is in the head, isn't it? Yeah. And if you've got that little niggling, and this isn't quite right, then your performance can just tail off or drop off a cliff. But I've done this since I was a kid, so way before heart rate monitors were invented and parameters were invented, so I kind of got used to it. But the critical question is know what you want it for. So I just think that, a power meter is a huge investment. If you're going to use it properly and test and train with it, it's a good investment. But actually, if you just want to keep riding, you're better off spending the money you just spent on a power meter on decent kit, so you can spend more time on the road, or a winter bike, so you don't trash your summer bike.
That's a good point.
So there's different ways that you can spend your money.
Okay, yeah. About making the right choice based on what you want out of cycling, really.
Correct, exactly that.
I guess there's a whole new generation now who are using power all the time because they are more accessible from a younger age as well, and all the pros use power.
Yeah, actually, I don't know whether they've stopped or they're just about to stop using power meters.
Have they?
In racing.
Oh, racing, okay, yeah.
Maybe to try and make the racing more interesting. I might be wrong about that.
Taking away the data.
Yeah, but
what would Chris Froome do?
But I think the smart trainers have introduced power to a lot more people as well, because you see it all the time now on the screen when you're Zwifting or trainer roading or whatever. It's all good stuff.
Okay.
I think whilst we're still talking about power meters and heart rate monitors, something that I think has probably been around for a little while, but the advances in wearable tech have meant that it's more accessible to more people, is heart rate variability. Really, really worth Googling heart rate variability to give yourself an understanding of what it is. I'll give you a kind of overview now, but I think that it's something that a lot of new Garmins can do, as in Garmin watches, and maybe the head units as well. But this one doesn't. This is like a wind-up one. It's really old. But what heart rate variability is aside from your heart rate variability looks at the distance between each individual heartbeat. Okay. All right. So, and they vary microscopically. And it used to be like you needed an ECG to do these things, but now even the optical sensors on the back of these watches and the heart rate straps are accurate enough to analyze that sort of information. There's loads of apps you can get for your phone that, if you've got a Bluetooth enabled heart rate monitor, will record and analyze your heart rate variability. Okay, so what does it mean? When you are healthy and fit to train, the gaps between your heartbeats fluctuate. And the reason they fluctuate is your body's governed by two nervous systems, the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. So there's two things, there's fight or flight, or rest and digest. They're two different things. And when you are in a good state, both of those systems are in balance, and what that balance actually leads to is more fluctuation between your heartbeats. So a high heart rate variability, and that's good. That means you're good to train. And what an app on your phone will do is look at those intervals between the heartbeats and say, green, good to train, amber, okay to train, red, definitely have a rest.
Okay.
And actually, one of the reasons I've been thinking about this is because in terms of people who just want to ride their bike and maybe want to do the Festive 100, that sort of thing, something that can look at heart rate variability might well say to you, today you just need to take a rest day. So rather than ploughing on through and saying, it's only a couple of hours, it's still a couple of hours out in the cold and wet and it's still stress. What is also really interesting about heart rate variability is, we know about training stress on the bike. We can work that out from a number of different ways. If you've got a power meter, it's just going to give you a number of training stress, you can see it. What heart rate variability takes into account is training stress from everything else in your life.
Okay.
So if you're not sleeping well, if you're stressed with work, if you've had too much booze, if you've had too much rich food, all sorts of things, all sorts of weird stuff that will put your body under a bit of stress. Your heart rate variability, your heart rate takes this into account, these sort of relative contributions of all these different stressors that you might find in your life. So it could be that you've not trained hard, but you've had a terrible day at work, and that increases the sort of, makes a sympathetic nervous system dominant, pulls your heart rate variability or heart rate to one side. Effectively, if one's more dominant, then your heart rate variability decreases. And if you've had a stressful day at work, it will show. And you can then make a good assessment of whether you should be riding your bike. And you might say to me, well, okay, if you've had a stressful day at work, what you want to do is go out on your bike. But actually, that's the time to, if your body's not ready for it, you can possibly do damage to it. And you can put yourself into like a training stress hole that's really hard to get out of. I think it's really interesting technology. It's a really interesting development. I haven't started using it myself yet. I will. I think it's something that is good to understand about the way our bodies work. So, when we talk about what tech to buy, power meter if you want to race, heart rate monitor if you want to train. But if you want to just make sure that you're not overdoing it, you want to just keep riding your bike and make sure that it's not going to do anything detrimental to you, maybe start to look at a heart rate variability device. They're not particularly expensive, and you might find if you've got a modern Garmin, you've got everything you need already to get going with it, so it's no outlay.
I also admit it's not really a technology I'm aware of, but it sounds those traffic light systems seem really good. Like it just tells you really easily if you're able to train or you're.
Well, you should train.
Yeah, and I've been trying to buy a house recently, and I find it really stressful. But sort of measuring stress is really difficult, and I've found a few bike rides I've done recently. I've felt really rubbish, and trying to find out the cause of that.
Yeah,
and probably the stress of buying a house, where the stress doesn't manifest itself in an obvious way sometimes. The signs aren't always that clear, are they?
No, exactly.
But a system that does tell you red, green, amber sounds like a really easy way of using that heart rate data.
If you think it might be interesting to you, Google heart rate variability, and it will give a whole raft of information and probably try and convince you to spend some money on stuff, but it might well be that you don't need to. And if you do, it's not a massive outlay anyway. Okay,
well, let us know down below if you have heard of a heart rate variability, if you're using it, what your experience is.
I'd be really interested to know if people are using it. Yeah, and what experience they've had, and whether it gives a true measure. And I've got a couple of clients who use it, and they say, it gives a true measure of how they. The question you've got to ask yourself is, if you have an amber and it says you're going to have a bad day, do you have a bad day because it says amber, or do you know what I mean? So sometimes it can be like cart before the horse, but it'd be really interesting to know what people think.
I think it's something we both need to try, isn't it?
Yeah, I think
for
so.
A future video maybe to watch your space. So another really good question we had on the previous video about the off season was about e-bikes. Now, e-bikes are very popular right now. Lots of people are buying e-bikes. My parents have e-bikes, been amazing for them. But can you use an e-bike to improve your fitness in a way a normal bicycle can, or are you cheating yourself?
I absolutely love e-bikes.
Okay.
I think they're fantastic. I really genuinely do. And can you use them to improve your fitness? Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we're back to why you ride a bike. To get outside, to see different things, and to go and, And if you need an e-bike to do that, have an e-bike to do that. I mean, they are expensive. That's the only downside. I have a particular sort of case study on this. I used to mountain bike a lot when I was at school with a guy, and when we left school, I kind of parted ways, and he got a really busy job, busy with his family, stopped riding, and he was keen to get back into it, and he thought that he was never going to be able to ride with me again, until he'd done loads of training and got really fit. And I said to him, you really ought to look at an e-bike. He said, e-bike's cheating, isn't it? No, not cheating. You need to try one. It's not cheating in the slightest. And I think he tried one. We've been for loads of rides together. He's had it for about 9 to 12 months now. Okay. But he has, over that time, reduced the level of assist. So he now basically uses virtually no assist from when he started out using max assist almost. So with no assist, he's doing longer rides. And this is all off-road, by the way. This is a mountain bike. And, where you and I mountain bike, it's super hilly, isn't it? Really steep climbs. And I go out with him around there and he absolutely thrashes me. But the thing is, he's lost loads of weight. He feels better. He looks better. Everything's going right for him just because he bought this bike. And he's going riding with his mate from school who he's not ridden with for, however many years it is, I forget. So what's not to like about that? And actually, he's got to the point now where he has got so much fitter on his bike, he's considering buying a regular bike.
Oh, cool.
So I don't know how many cases there are where people have bought an e-bike to get back into it and then look to buy a standard bike? Is that what they're called?
Yeah.
A non-e-bike,
yeah.
assisted bike. But yeah, I think they're just amazing.
So it's easing back into cycling in a way that if he hadn't had an e-bike, he would have done loads of training to get to the point where he could keep up with you, because I know you are fast. So it's given a leg up almost. And now he's getting to the point where he's considering a normal bike. He's got so much fitter from riding an e-bike. I guess using an e-bike is back to the point of not worrying about data and just riding.
Just ride your bike.
Enjoyment of riding a bike. And an e-bike, if that gives you the ability to get out riding when you might not, it's a good thing.
Yeah, I think they're brilliant.
And
if it gets more people on bikes, it's a good thing. It's a good thing.
And you still have to pedal them. They're not like they're race bikes.
I think that's the misconception, isn't it? That you can just sail along on e-power without putting any effort in. But that's not true. I mean, that's definitely not true. And when we first went out and he was on his e-bike, he was, pouring sweat. He was working. Yeah. It's not like it's not a free ride. Definitely not. And that's why you can definitely use it to improve your fitness. I mean, I'd love an e-bike. I've not got one. But for a day when I don't want to be on the rivet, I still want to be able to go and do some downhilling, or it's basically a free uplift, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So e-bikes are cool.
Really cool. I don't know about road bikes. What do you think about road bikes?
I haven't tried many, to be honest. I need to try more. But I know the speed limit is an issue with e-bikes for people who can ride at a decent lick. But for mountain biking,
I mean,
you rarely go that fast on a mountain bike, do you?
Well, downhill you do, but it doesn't matter then, does it?
My average speed on a mountain bike is like 10k an hour. It's pretty slow. Usually mud and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, so in light of not having tried them on the road, I think that my experience with mountain bikes, I mean, I've tried his bike, it's amazing. It's amazing. I love it. I think they're just fantastic. You see them in the Alps all the time, these guys who, they've ridden all their lives and they just need a little bit extra to get up the, 20k climb.
And I suppose the winter is a good time to use an e-bike because it is more challenging out there. Like if you're riding off-road, it's really slow, it's boggy and muddy, especially here in the UK. And if you're riding on the road, a lot more wind and rain and bad road conditions. So an e-bike helps you ride through the winter, and then you get to spring, you get back to your normal bike.
Maybe.
But you retain that fitness in a way that, it's a very different approach to using an indoor trainer, power meters and intervals, isn't it? But it's not a bad approach, it's just a different way of doing it.
Different, yeah. It gets you out, that's great.
Yeah. Okay, so we covered quite a few topics there. We're down to mince pie. We're going to go off and eat the rest of these mince pies. Maybe we'll catch up again in the new year and see how all your festive 500s have got on.
Hopefully successfully.
And, you going to give it a crack this year?
No.
No, not at all. No, me neither. But I try to ride my bike as much as I can when it's nice outside. But I hope you all have a great Christmas. And from me and from Dan, thanks for watching. We'll see you all again very soon.